Excellent. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining the November meeting of the Winston-Salem Urban Area Transportation Advisory Committee. Is this echo bothering anybody except me? Doesn't sound like I'm talking from the cave of the winter summer bear or whatever it was. Okay, good. We'll continue that. Kirk, if you will go ahead and give us our roll call of members, please. And ladies and gentlemen, I'll remind you, if you would keep yourselves muted until we call your name for a vote, or when you are going to speak, that would help us a lot with the noise control.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll start with Mr. Clark.
Present.
Mr. Bessie.
I'm here.
Mr. McIntosh.
Here.
Mr. Cross.
Here.
Mr. Rogers.
Here.
Mr. Waite.
I'm here.
Ms. Fulton.
Here.
Mr. Horn.
Here.
Mr. Byram.
Here.
Mr. Morris.
Here.
Mr. Clark.
Here.
Is there anyone I missed?
Tim Flincham, Mayor of Rural Hall. I'm one of your call-ins.
Thank you, Mr. Flincham. All right, Mr. Chairman, roll call is complete.
Okay. Thank you. Very good. Mr. Clark, welcome. You're an alternate. We don't often get to see your face. And who else is an alternate this evening? Mr. McIntosh, are you an alternate?
I will be until Dee Dee shows up.
Well, very good. It's always good to see your face too, albeit bearded as it is. It's nice to have you present with us. Ladies and gentlemen, because of COVID-19 restrictions, the members and staff are participating in this meeting today in a virtual meeting on Cisco WebEx. As customary, I'm required to ask if any member present today has any conflict of interest with any of the items that are due to come before us at this meeting. This would be any kind of financial gain or other personal interest that would predicate your vote not being able to be given. If anybody has a conflict of interest, now is the time to please let us know. Very good. Thank you very much. Members, I'd like to add one item that wasn't on your agenda when it went out, and we'll add it under staff reports. This would be letter N, and this will be a report on the Great Trails State Plan that I think it's important we just have a brief update on. Kirk, is there anybody who is in the wings wishing to speak during public comments?
Mr. Chairman, we do not have anyone at this point.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Okay. Members, you had a chance to review the minutes of our last meeting. Are there any changes or revisions? And if not, we'll entertain a motion to approve.
Move to approve, Rick Cross.
Mr. Cross makes the motion. Yeah. And I believe that was Ms. Adams who arrived in time just to second that motion. Very good. And Ms. Adams makes the second. Kirk, if you will do the roll call, please.
Mr. Clark.
Which one?
Robert.
Here, or whatever, yes.
Thank you. Mr. Bessie.
Yes.
Ms. Adams voted yes. Mr. Cross voted yes. Mr. Rogers.
Yes.
Mr. Waite.
Yes.
Ms. Fulton.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Mr. Flincham.
Yes.
Mr. Byram.
Yes.
Mr. Hutchins.
Yes.
Mr. Morris.
Yes.
And Willie Clark.
Mr. Clark, I think you were muted.
Just,
Yes.
Thank you.
Very good, thank you.
Motion's unanimous.
Very good, thank you, members. Our next item of business is a public hearing. Members, we were briefed on this. Actually, we've been briefed on this several times, and the update of the planning for our 2045 Metropolitan Transportation Plan. I believe, Byron, you are going to lead us off on this, and you're going to introduce Luba Zueva.
Greetings, everyone. The Winston-Salem MPL staff, along with consultants at VHB, have been working on updates to the 2040 Metropolitan Transportation Plan. During the last meeting, we adopted this plan, and we mentioned that this is a working document which would be amended from time to time based on project development, federal requirements, updates, and other information as needed. Today, we have staff from VHB when we'll discuss the Mtp amendments as well as the congestion management plan, which we have up for adoption today. As we continue to update our documents, we'll bring back a comprehensive transportation plan in January for action. This item per our public participation plan required a 30-day public comment period in which we received no comments. I'll turn it over to Luba, who was with the VHB staff, for a presentation on the updates to
Thank you, Byron. Good evening, Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen. Happy to be here with you today to provide an update on the proposed Mtp amendment for your consideration today, as well as the congestion management process document. So as Byron already mentioned, we did bring the Mtp draft for adoption back in September. So the items for amendment to the Mtp today that are being considered are an update to Chapter 3, a description of the transportation planning factors and how those were incorporated as part of the transportation planning process. And then also we have made some updates to the financial plan in Chapter 6, as well as Appendix C, which includes some additional tables with the full financial plan listing of projects. Now, something to note is that there haven't been any changes made to the recommended projects. So whatever projects were in the Mtp plan that were approved in September, all of those projects remain in this version of the plan. So the changes again were to the text of Chapter 3, and then some changes to the tables and headings of Chapter 6 financial plan, and also some of the appendices reflecting updated financial tables. So I'm going to review some of the details with you now. We go to the next slide, please, Byron. So when it comes to the transportation planning factors, those are federal required transportation planning factors that we have to take into account as part of the Mtp plan update. And something to note, a couple of those planning factors were included more recently as of 2015 with the FAST Act adoption. Those are a focus on resiliency and reliability of the transportation system, so taking into account extreme weather events and storm water issues, as well as enhancing travel and tourism. So in Chapter 3, we have made those changes to reflect more fully how the transportation planning factors are being taken into account. Next slide, please. When it comes to the financial plan, some of the changes that were made as we have updated the headings and the titles to reflect a financial plan versus the previously used terminology of fiscally constrained plan. We have also brought the funding amounts and the cost amounts to reflect year of expenditure dollars. So what that means is that we have taken into account the inflation rate that is expected, and we increased both the cost of the projects as well as the revenue. So the basic assumption here is that while the cost of the projects will increase over time, we expect that the federal and state and local funding levels will continue to keep up with the level of inflation. So it kind of balances the book. So again, no projects were added or removed as a result of this financial plan update to reflect the year of expenditure dollars amounts. One thing we did add is a category of funding for Powell bill maintenance funding. Now this is funding that's allocated from the state to local municipalities to help maintain those locally maintained roads. We did not break it out into specific projects by corridor. This is more of a lump sum project line item that is now shown in the financial plan tables. And next, please. some of the additional changes that were shown in the financial plan tables. For clarity, we broke it out by different funding categories. And again, amounts are reflecting year of expenditure dollars. And both the cost and the revenue are broken out by categories such as state and federal maintenance and local. And again, this update also was reflected in our Appendix C at Mtp, where you can see the larger table. And if you go to the next slide, please, Byron. If you go to Appendix C, which starts approximately at page 173 of the full plan with appendices posted on the website currently, you can see the full listing of projects with funding amounts. So again, those funding amounts have been updated to expected year of expenditure dollars. So with the Mtp amendment, as Byron has already mentioned, we have not received any public comment. Again, this Mtp amendment was posted for public comment, listed on the website, and we did hold a public meeting on October 22nd. And then next, I'm going to review the congestion management process update with you. So congestion management process is another one of those federal required transportation plan updates that larger urban areas such as Winston-Salem, so urban areas over 200,000 population, have to go through this plan update. Next slide, please. So part of the background here is that there is a desire to identify additional mitigation strategies for congestion. So we all know that congestion can be harmful in terms of economic growth and development, can just cost people their time in their lives. But there are other ways to address congestion in addition to widening to increase capacity. So congestion management process is intended to be this coordinated, comprehensive process to be aligned with other transportation plan updates to help the region think through additional mitigation strategies. So how else can we address congestion other than simply trying to widen congested corridors every time? So as part of the CMP plan update, in this round, we reviewed what are some of the key target congested corridors that the region should be paying particular attention to, and then we identified some of the strategies for relieving congestion in addition to widening and capacity projects which are already identified in the Mtp. And something to note is that there's not a specific timeline for CMP plan update. However, it's probably a good strategy to continue to update it in coordination with the Mtp or other transportation planning processes, because some of the data points are similar and some of the factors being considered relate to each other between the Mtp plan update and the CMP. Next slide, please. One of the factors, or one of the great data sources that we have for congestion is we can always look to the TTI for Urban Mobility Report. They kind of produce this congestion scorecard every couple of years. So the latest data they released in 2019, this is pre-COVID numbers, but you can look up Winston-Salem congestion metrics from Texas A&M Transportation Institute, the mobility scorecard, and it kind of reflects that per person and regional overall congestion numbers have been increasing over time. So that does result in additional per person, per household, and per business delay. So there is real cost associated with congestion. You know, people are stuck in traffic longer. There's more gas being burned. There's environmental impacts. So congestion is definitely having an impact on the region. Now, again, this was before COVID. During the COVID times, we are seeing that the congestion patterns have been slightly different. For example, the afternoon peak, that those trips seem to be more spread out during multiple hours of the day. So you're not maybe seeing as many or as much of a pronounced AM peak and afternoon peak. However, congestion is likely to return to more normal patterns after the COVID pandemic is more under control in the next couple of years. So I expect that we will see more of a focus on congestion again once people return to more normal travel patterns. Next slide, please. Particularly concerning as far as roadway issues. And so congestion or traffic issues was the #1 issue highlighted for people when they were thinking about roadway concerns. And then the map on the left kind of highlights some of those dots in the map where members of the public provided feedback through the survey, and they're able to identify specific areas of concern for congestion. And so you can kind of see some of those key areas of concern that show up around Bermuda Run, at I-40 and Salem Parkway interchange, kind of between Louisville and Clements, more central in Winston-Salem, and then Kernersville, and then generally along those key north-south, east-west corridors where you would expect to see some of those congestion concerns. And next slide, please. So it was helpful to get this public feedback, but we also looked at the data available as far as congestion. And so for the base year conditions, we used two different data sources. One was the regional travel demand model, which part maintains and updates for the region. And then the other source of data was real-time cell phone data from here. So on the left, you can see the highlighted key congested corridors based on the travel demand model. Those were key arterials with volume to capacity above 0.9, so getting really close to at capacity. And then the map on the right shows those areas highlighted in red where the corridors were showing up as congested in the real-time cell phone data. And so there are some similarities and some differences. Now, of course, should be noted that travel demand model is a great tool to see the higher level trends. It's not necessarily as detailed to always pick up the impact of specific intersections or interchanges. So you might have some very localized congestion issues that here data will pick up that the travel demand model might not be seeing. So that's why you're seeing some additional red areas in the here data. So between looking at the travel demand model data and the here data, we were able to identify those key congested corridors of concern. And then we also looked at the future year data. Next slide, please, Byron. So the map on the left shows those key corridors with congestion concerns looking out to 2045. So again, we looked at the volume to capacity ratio of above 0.9 out to 2045 for major arterials. And so you can see that the list of key corridors expands once we take it 25 years out. The map on the right highlights some of the intelligent transportation system improvements that are already recommended in the MTP plan, the light green lines overlapping the darker green. So those could be the types of improvements where you do some on-ramp metering for interstate highways, or you might be doing some more innovative treatments such as bus on shoulder recommended for I-40. Or you might be doing some signal priority timing solutions or additional signal messaging, kind of electronic messaging on the highway to alert motorists when there is a big congestion bottlenecks coming up ahead. So those types of treatments can all be considered as part of intelligent transportation systems. So I think we were happy to see that a lot of the ITS recommended corridors overlap with some of those key priority congested corridors that we have identified looking out to 2045. Next slide, please. So it's already mentioned the goal of congestion management process is to identify additional strategies that can be used to mitigate congestion beyond simply widening and capacity projects. And of course, in the MTP 2045 plan, there are some of those major capacity widening projects, including a major widening on I-40 that was recommended. However, when looking at additional mitigation strategies, there's quite a toolbox that can be utilized in the region. So some of those tools include transportation demand management strategies such as van pooling, carpooling, and additional programs that PART already has in place, possibly expansion to some of those programs. Under the public transit category, there could be additional improvements to local and regional transit routes, some of the park and ride lot improvements. Under the bicycle and pedestrian category, you could certainly improve the reach of public transit simply by improving those walking and bicycling connections to your public transit service, but also improving bicycling and walking conditions around your key activity centers and downtowns could be another congestion mitigation strategy. So people can walk for shorter trips instead of always having to get in their car. Parking management can also be a key part of the solutions. Now, of course, right now it might not be as much of an issue, but again, when conditions return to pre-COVID, more or less normal congestion, and people are still trying to think whether or not they're going to drive to go out for dinner, or are they going to Uber over there? Are they going to maybe walk or take the bus, then how much you're charging for parking in your downtown areas or in your activity centers could make a difference. And is there a time limit on how long people can park? So that can be part of the toolbox as well. And then, of course, roadway modernization, some of those smaller improvements, or maybe you're looking at intersection, smaller improvements, traffic signal retiming, adding a left turn lane here and there, possibly some access management such as medians. Some of those solutions can be more smaller in their footprint, not require as much investment in terms of widening and acquiring right of way, and can have real net benefits in terms of congestion reduction, but also safety and just the efficiency of traffic flow. And next slide, please. So it's already mentioned, we have posted both the MTP amendment and the draft congestion management process for public comment for a 30-day period. We held the public input meeting on October 22nd, and we did not receive any comment during this public comment period. So with that, I'd like to open it up for questions. Thank you.
Members, any questions on the consideration of amendments? Ms. Adams. I think you're muted there. Dee Dee, I think you're still muted.
Working it out. I'm working it out. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. My question to staff is it possible to not, in the future, to break out certain areas of the city, such as if I wanted to see the north, northeast, southeast, east side of Winston, would that be possible minus all of the other projects that are listed within this 200-something page report?
Yes, this is something that we would be able to do for you. Once we have the GIS data, after everything is wrapped up, we'll be able to go through and comb out any particular location that you want to focus on to see what projects are included in that area. And
Mr. Brown, I think that's very important because this is a lot of information even for the TAC to digest. It's one of those deals where you got to break it up in bits and pieces. And sometimes, again, I think where we may have an opportunity to engage the other parts of the community that basically know nothing about this until it comes up in a committee meeting or something, that something's changing. And that's when they start to ask the question of, why isn't nobody told us? And that doesn't necessarily mean everybody's plugged into the internet or, and that sort of thing. So I'd like to get with you and staff to see how I can get it broken out so other council members, particularly in our marginalized and poor communities, Black and Brown, can see whatever projects that we're doing, again, in the north, the northeast, the east, and the southeast. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. Any other questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Actually, it's a good segue from Councilmember Adams' comments. Probably applies to every area that it would be easier and we'd get more input if we were able to give people the opportunity to look at possible projects near them. By not coincidence purely, but by the sheer fact that I recognize a street name as a center of ongoing controversy, I happen to notice one of the projects included in the roadway capacity and new location projects list beginning on page 30 of the packet. It's London Lane, which is a flashpoint for congestion issues, controversy in southern Winston-Salem. And it's in fact one that the city has done at least 2 rounds of traffic calming on, trying to address overlay of that neighborhood street, frankly, which also happens to be, to the great chagrin of the neighborhood, one of the few cut-throughs between Everett Road and Burke Mill Road. And there is buried in this list of possible projects, not to the best of my ability to check it out, funded and way down the road, but there is a reference to expanding London Lane to deal with congestion from 2 lanes to 4 lanes. I can tell you that would probably bring out that entire neighborhood with torches and pitchforks storming Dr. Frankenstein's castle if we ever tried to do that. And honestly, that's the kind of project that we could save future boards a little time by Xing out at an earlier stage before there was a lot of study put into it, because politically it would be a complete DOA proposal. And I'd be interested in any feedback on that.
Actually, I was going to say I appreciate your feedback, and that is something that we can, as we're going through this process, can talk to Lou about and see about whether we can remove it or what the best approach for this would be.
Yeah, and frankly, I'd recommend just approving it sooner rather than later. I mean, probably removing it sooner rather than later.
If I may make a suggestion, we could also consider updating the project type from a capacity widening to modernization. So for example, if you're thinking about doing some safety or turning lane improvements in the future, or even adding complete streets, that could be considered a modernization type of project. If you think that widening is not acceptable with the local community, that could be a possible substitution of a project type rather than removing it altogether. Or of course, we could remove it if that is the preference.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Bessie. I think in my discussions with staff, of course, they made me keenly aware of this is a document for planning purposes. And as we move forward, many of us won't be here in 2045, but some of us will be, this will be flexible and be changed and adapted to the needs of our community. But this is a great starting point for us to be able to do what Mr. Bessie, you just did, and Ms. Adams, you just did, is to make some recommendations on how we can improve that usefulness to our communities. Thank you for your comments.
Mr. Chairman, I have one question, please. This is Alameen.
Yes, sir.
In the same regard of Councilman Bessie and Mayor Pro Tem Adams, if they could also tease out District A, there are about 33 precincts in District A, but I've gotten a few maps on the whole district, and identify those projects also that are road related. And I'll be very specific. We have an issue on Oak Summit with 88 homes coming in that development on a road that was built for farming when it was just a farm road. So you can imagine what the concentration of vehicles has done to that community. It was not built for that kind of consideration of traffic. And the community quite often has expressed that, but they could see it more clearly if it was on a map, specifically within the District A area for the county commissioners' regional responsibility that I have. So I would appreciate that very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Alameen. Appreciate those comments. Anyone else? I have one quick comment. Some of you may have been part of the effort a number of years ago, and this would be on reference to page 58 on the high-speed rail. And Byron, I don't know if you can speed over to that page or not, but a number of years ago, we were concerned when the initial plan came out for high-speed rail that Winston-Salem was not included in that plan. A delegation of us went to Raleigh and had what we thought was a very productive meeting with the governor, who at that point told us that we would indeed, and I think it showed up on subsequent state maps, that we would have a spur into Winston-Salem. Lube, I didn't know if you all were, what your sources were for this particular project, but is there any way that we can go back through and recapture those decisions? And anyone else who was part of that group, please feel free to jump in and reinforce my memory if it's not correct.
And Mr. Chair, I believe you're speaking to a map that was included in the draft CGP document. So the draft CGP document is not being adopted today, so we can surely make an update to that map if needed.
That's great. Other council members, is my memory correct on this, Ms. Adams?
Yes, it is, Mayor Horn. You all went to Raleigh, and some of us were going in other shifts to Raleigh. I think Ms. Councilmember Bessie was a part of this at one point. That right now, this part of the state that everybody wants to tout as the next frontier to the west, the Piedmont, if we don't get a spur for rail transportation, and if everybody on this TAC committee doesn't start making phone calls to, you know, Congress, congressional representatives, our senators, legislators, this is going to be a bad, you know, scenario for this part of the state. Everybody has mentioned about updates and high-speed rail. I read it too, Mayor, and you know, it disappointed me to the point that rail is the future. If you're going to move people and goods, you've got to have rail. And their plan to do it from DC to Atlanta and go through Greensboro, High Point, and what else, Charlotte and whatever. I think it's a travesty. I do. Thank you.
I agree, Mr. Mayor, that I think that this is something that a number of us have been involved in. And it would be good to remind them that we'd like to be included as part of a spur or a loop coming through our area. There's some specific projects that need to be done, some overhaul of infrastructure, a trestle or two that would make that potentially a reality. And if we don't keep bringing them up, don't forget about them.
I think the mayor's frozen.
I could step in and attempt a temporary coup here as the vice chair, sort of keep it moving until Mike connects with us again. Are there other questions or comments on item 3? Ms. Zuyeva, any other points you would call to our attention or other comments in response to what's been brought up so far?
No further comment. I believe that the amendment could be adopted with the inclusion of the change to roadway project 414 London Road to change the type to modernization instead of capacity widening.
Okay. And perhaps to add what Mayor Horn and Mayor Pro Tem Adams referenced about the high-speed rail spur?
The high-speed rail map could be updated in the CTP document, which is still being updated, and that will come back to this body for review in January.
All right. Is Mayor Horn back with us yet?
I don't think so.
Okay, well, in that case, if there are no other questions or comments, and pending the possibility of reconsideration if Mayor Horn gets back on and has further updates for us, is there a motion to approve the update comprehensive transportation plan and Metropolitan transportation plan update as amended?
So move.
Second.
Motion by Member Tim Adams, and who was the second, please? Mr. Clark? Yeah, okay, Councilmember Clark. And let's see, Mr. Brown, would you be calling the roll here? Pardon me, I wasn't paying attention who was calling it. No, I'm sorry, that was Eric, yes. Eric, would you please call the roll?
Yes, thank you. Robert Clark voted yes. Mr. Bessie?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Adams voted yes. Mr. Elamine?
Yes.
Mr. Cross?
Yes.
Mr. Rogers,
Yes.
John Rogers, are you there?
I vote yes.
Mr. Waite,
Sorry, did you call me John White?
yes.
Yes.
Ms. Fulton,
In favor, thank you.
Chairman Horn, are you with us yet? Hearing nothing, Mr. Flincham,
Yes.
Mr. Byram,
Yes.
Mr. Hutchins,
Yes.
Mr. Morris,
Yes.
Mr. Perkins,
Yes. Yes.
and Willie Clark.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Let's go on then to action item number 4, consideration of fiscal year 2020-2029 Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program amendments and modifications. I believe, Mr. Brown, your lead here.
Okay. The Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program, or NTIP, is a comprehensive listing of all the projects programmed for the Winston-Salem urban area. This document must match the state's Transportation Improvement Program, or STIP, which is regularly updated with amendments, modifications, and deletions of projects. This includes amendments and modifications the amendments and modifications before you were reviewed by the public for 30 days per our public participation policy from August 15, 2020 to September 16, 2020. Included in this pack of modifications are statewide projects, various local projects that have been amended, such as the Beltway and 158, which sections of have been delayed for right-of-way acquisition, and as well as additional amendments for park. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions about any of the amendments.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Brown? We'll give a moment longer. Any questions or comments? Going twice, going 3 times. Is there a motion for approval?
Move for approval of Mayor Pro Tem Adams.
Mayor Pro Tem Adams moves approval. Is there a second?
Second, Robert.
Okay, let's spread the wealth, and I recognize Commissioner Elamine as the second. If there's no further discussion, Mr. Erickson, would you call the roll, please?
All right, Robert Clark voted yes. Mayor Pro Tem Adams also voted yes. Mr. Elamine voted yes. Mr. Cross?
Yes.
Mr. Rogers?
Yes.
Mr. Waite?
Yes.
Ms. Fulton?
Yes.
Mr. Horn, are you with us yet?
He had a power surge. He said he'd be logging in shortly.
Okay, Mr. Flincham?
Yes.
Mr. Byram?
Yes.
Mr. Hutchins?
Yes.
Mr. Morris?
Yes.
Mr. Perkins?
Yes.
And Willie Clark?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right, and I'll note that I also voted yes.
Apologies, Vice Chairman.
That's all right. Let's then move to agenda item 5. Consideration of a letter of support for Davidson County Department of Senior Services, the Workshop of Davidson, and the Life Center of Davidson County for North Carolina DOT's Federal Transit Administration's Section 5310 funding. And I believe the report here from staff is Kelly Garman.
Yes, sir. The item before you, as mentioned, is the consideration of further support for Davidson County Department of Senior Services, the Workshop of Davidson, and the Life Center of Davidson County for Ncdot's Federal Transit Administration Section 5310 funding. Ncdot's Public Transportation Division administers the application and the selection process for allocation of Section 5310 funds. The Section 5310 program provides funding to improve mobility for seniors and individuals with disabilities by removing barriers to transportation services and expanding the transportation mobility options. the Workshop of Davidson, Life Center of Davidson County, and Davidson County Department of Senior Services provides services within the NPO and in the rural areas in Davidson County for disabled persons and individuals 65 years and older. Only services provided within the urbanized area, however, of the this is an urban area NPO, are eligible for funding through the NPO. For areas that are determined not to be within the UZA, these providers can apply for funding through the state Section 5310 funding program. This letter of support acknowledges these agencies' desires to participate in the state's competitive selection process for services provided outside of the NPO UZA, and it also acknowledges the TAC's support of these agencies to apply for this funding source. The Workshop of Davidson has requested $130,000. Life Center of Davidson County has requested $48,000, and Davidson County Department of Senior Services has requested $450,000 from the state's 5310 program. Should this request be approved by the board, the letters will be signed by the TAC chair and provided to these agencies.
All right, thank you, Ms. Garvin. Are there questions or comments? Forgive me for not having memorized the roll call. Mr. Erickson is our Davidson County representative with us.
I do not see Mr. Krotz in the meeting.
Okay. If there are no questions or comments, is there a motion to approve?
This is Mayor Byram from Midway. I'll make that motion.
Mayor Byram moves approval. Is there a second?
Alameen, second.
All right, Commissioner Alameen seconds. Thank you, Mayor Byram and Commissioner Alameen. If there's no further discussion, Mr. Erickson, would you please call the roll?
Yes, Robert Clark. Councilmember Clark.
Robert.
Here.
Are you with us?
Yes.
All right, Mr. Bessie.
Yes.
Miss Adams.
Yes.
Mr. Elamine voted yes. Mr. Cross.
Yes.
Mr. Rogers.
Yes.
Mr. Waite.
Mr. White had to switch phones. If he's not back on yet, he'll be back on momentarily.
I'm switching, but the answer is yes. And I put in the chat that my phone number. I got to make a switch here and go pick up kids from tennis. So I apologize, but I don't want to ruin the quorum. So I'm trying to make it work.
All right, we'll assume you're here unless we learn otherwise.
Thank you.
Ms. Fulton.
Go ahead, please.
Yes.
Chairman Horn, are you back with us?
I am, and yes.
Thank you. Mr. Flincham?
Yes.
Mr. Hutchins?
Yes.
Mr. Morris?
Yes.
Mr. Perkins?
Yes.
And Willie Clark?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Horn, you have the gavel, sir.
Yeah, and I'm going to take it to Duke Energy. It was quite an interesting experience, but thank you, Vice Chairman, Mr. Bentley, for your always reliable stand-in these situations. I'm guessing we are down to action item number 6.
Yes, sir.
Very good. Tonique, I believe this is your item, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. The item before you is the approval of the Federal Transit Administration Section 50 Enhanced Mobility of Seniors and Individuals with Disabilities Grant and Section 5307 Job Access Reverse Commute Awards for eligible recipients for fiscal year 2020 funds, and plans to amend the MTP, and it's also, this is scheduled for a public hearing. So the item is related to the distribution of funds to subrecipients to provide services to seniors and individuals with disabilities, which is the 5310 funds, and to individuals to get access to work, which is our 5307 funds. For our 5310 funds, we had a call for projects for both categories. And the call for projects yielded 8 agencies requesting funds for our 5310 category. The total that they requested was $845,827. We only had $365,651 available. For our Section 5307 JARC funding, we had $55,000 available, and we only received requests for a total of $31,000. The applications that we received were then sent to our Burlington Urban Area Metropolitan Planning Organization for their review and scoring. And based upon the scores, they also made recommendations on how the funding should be distributed. Realizing that we had a request in higher quantity than funding availability, they based the calculation based upon the funds that we had available. And what you see on the attachment for approval is the distribution of funding to the 8 agencies. You will also see in both categories funding to go to the Winston-Salem Transit Authority. For our 5310 funds, that amount is a token amount, mainly to put a line item for the Transit Authority in the case that our funding agencies are unable to spend down the funds before we lose them. And if we approach the potential of losing the funds, then we are able to then transfer those funds for uses in our Transit Authority so that funds stay within our MPO. This item is, we've had a 30-day public participation period open, and we did not receive any feedback or any comments from anyone in the public. I will answer any questions that you might have at this time.
Very good. Any questions for Ms. McCullough? Byron, if you could scroll down to the actual appropriations by group. There we go. One of the questions I had for staff, and I think it reflects some concerns expressed to me by one of the organizations, the Shepherd Center. My understanding, again, and thank you staff for explaining this to me, my understanding was that the Burlington area MPO did the ranking of this, and they simply did it with an empirical formula based on a percentage of requests and money available. The question I have for staff is, you have organizations like the Shepherd Center that were ranked 95 out of 100, which seemed to me to be a high priority item, but received, they did not receive any weighted appropriation compared to some of the other organizations that received much lower rankings. So I guess the question again that I would raise to TAC members and staff is that do we feel this is an adequate or an accurate representation or allocation of funds predicated on the review score?
Mr. Chairman, I can share with you how they distributed the funds. What they did is they used the score, and based upon the score, they then developed a percentage of the total of funding available. And dependent on what that percentage was, is the amount of the total funds that was recommended for each of the agencies. There may be a couple of agencies that had a lower score that seemed to receive 100% of their funding, but the way that Burlington evaluated, they did not look at how much the agency actually requested, but did a percentage of the total. And in the case where, for instance, the town of Kernersville received the 100% recommendation, it was because the amount that Burlington recommended for that agency was more than what the town of Kernersville asked for. In the case of the Shepherd Center, they did get the vast majority of the funding recommendation, but we wanted to make sure that all of the agencies that submitted applications and that provide the services to citizens within the MPO were able to get some portion of the funding. One thing that does not show up on the spreadsheet that you have is that there are various needs that are being met, but there are also the various agencies provide services during different times of the day and hours. And so if the majority of them go to the Shepherd Center, then there may be some services that might not be, or some needs that might not be met during the hours when the Shepherd Center is not in service. For instance, the Shepherd Center provides services Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, but they do not provide services on Saturdays and Sundays. But your agencies, some of your other agencies do provide services on Saturdays, and they also provide services on Sunday and after hours, after 5 o'clock.
Okay. Thank you for that explanation. Members, any comments? Ms. Fulton, let me assure you, I'm not trying to take money away from Kernersville, so that's not the intent of this discussion.
Yes, right. I was worried about you.
Tanik, is there are there any other avenues available for funding? Because I know the Shepherd Center is, and again, I'm sure all of these organizations are receiving requests for services, particularly among our senior populations, that are far going to outstrip what they provided this year, and they will only increase for next year. Are there other sources of revenues that we can begin to refer them to try to secure?
As you approved in the previous item, if they're providing services in the counties, then they can apply for these similar funds through the state, which has funding available for areas of service outside of the urban areas specifically. And I think a lot of these agencies also receive funding through other avenues, separate and apart from transportation funding that they may use to support the services that they provide. But as far as funding that we currently have through the MPO, I'm not aware of any right now that we've had and made available to these agencies.
We might be able to recommend then a similar path that Davie County took.
That is something that they can consider, but that will only be available to them if they're providing services outside of the urban area.
Gotcha. I'm with you. That's a rural program. Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate that recommendation, and we'll do what we can to get information back to them. Members, any other questions on this item before we open the public hearing? Very good. Then we'll convene the public hearing. Kirk, are there any participants wishing to speak?
I'm not aware of any, Mr. Chairman.
Very good. With that, we'll close the public hearing. Members will entertain a motion.
Move to approve. This is Rick Cross.
Mr. Cross makes the motion.
Second, Mayor Pro Tem Adams.
Ms. Adams makes the second. Thank you very much. Kirk, would you please do the roll call for us?
Councilmember Clark. Councilmember Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Bessie.
Yes.
Ms. Adams voted yes. Mr. Elamine.
Yes.
Mr. Cross voted yes. Mr. Rogers.
Yes.
Mr. Waite.
Yes.
Ms. Fulton.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Mr. Flincham.
Yes.
Mr. Byram.
Yes.
Mr. Hutchins.
Yes.
Mr. Morris.
Yes.
Mr. Perkins.
Yes.
And Willie Clark. Willie, are you still with us?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Very good. Thank you very much, members. Tanika, you also have the next item for our consideration.
Yes, sir. Thank you again. Agenda item number 7 is a review of the Winston-Salem, actually it's a consideration of approval of the Winston-Salem Transit Authority Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan. In July of 2018, FTA published the Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan and final rule, which required certain operators of public transportation systems that receive federal funds under FTA's urban area formula grants to develop safety plans that include the processes and procedures to implement safety management systems. The rule became effective in July of 2019. Due to COVID, the requirements were changed such that plans are due by December 31st of 2020. So what you have attached to this item is Worcester's safety plan. The safety plan was presented at the last meeting. Since that time, there were no significant changes to the plan. There were just some grammatical errors and minor changes, like minor modifications like that, which were made to the overall plan. Worcester is requesting that this plan be adopted at this meeting such that they can meet the requirements of FTA. And if it is adopted today, then they will then submit it to FTA for their final acceptance and approval. I will answer any questions you might have.
Mr. Chair, I move for approval and adoption.
I'll second. Dan Basic.
I love it.
Is he gone again?
I think so.
You know, you pay your bill every month. They don't do this.
Dan, it's
all right. We got you. All right.
You know what?
Okay,
I was muted. That was probably just terrible of me because I'm unmuted now. So we had a motion to approve by Ms. Adams, a second by Mr. Bessie. We'll promote him to Dr. Bessie here. Kirk, will you please call the roll? Thank you.
Councilmember Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Bessie voted yes. Mayor Pro Tem Adams voted yes. Mr. Elamine.
Yes.
Mr. Cross.
Yes.
Mr. Rogers.
Yes.
Mr. Waite.
Yes.
Mr. Waite may be unavailable. Ms. Fulton.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, please.
Mr. Flincham.
Yes.
Mr. Byram.
Yes.
Mr. Hutchins.
Yes.
Mr. Morris.
Yes.
Mr. Perkins.
Yes.
And Willie Clark.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes unanimously.
Very good. Thank you, members. I promise you we will get through this tonight. Our next item, I believe, Byron, is yours, please.
Okay. Greetings again, everyone. During our last meeting, I presented information on the purpose and procedures for modifying the Winston-Salem Urban Area Federal Functional Classification Network. Again, the FFC is a reflection of the character of our transportation network. Of course, this can change depending on land use, traffic patterns, and other facility type changes. When we have a great understanding of our transportation network, we can better plan, collect data, understand our federal funding strategies and prioritization, put together better guidelines, increase our network's efficiency, as well as understand the hierarchy of the road network. 2 roadway segments were suggested by Ncdot to be added to our submittal requests at our last meeting. Those being 1, the addition of Main Street from 6th Street to North Liberty Street as a major collector. The other addition was Rams Drive from MLK to Research Parkway as a minor collector. With the approval of the board, these road segments will be added to our current request for modification and be reviewed by Ncdot as well as FHWA. Staff will still be conducting an open call for requests to modify the FFC beginning tomorrow. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you have at this time.
Members, any questions for Mr. Brown? With that, we'll entertain a motion.
I'll move. Clark.
Sound like Mr. Clark was moving?
Yes.
Is there a second?
Alameen.
And Mr. Alameen makes a second. Thank you very much. Kirk, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Clark voted yes. Mr. Bessie?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Alameen voted yes. Mr. Cross?
Yes.
Mr. Rogers?
Yes.
Mr. Waite? Mr. Waite may be busy still. Ms. Fulton?
Yes.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Got it. Thank you. Mr. Horn?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Flincham?
Yes.
Mr. Byram?
Yes.
Mr. Hutchins?
Yes.
Mr. Morris?
Yes.
Mr. Perkins?
Yes.
And Willie Clark?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you, members. Kelly, I believe you are our action item number 9.
Yes, sir. The item before you is the consideration of the request to swap surface transportation block grant direct attributable funds with surface transportation block grant flex funds. This exercise was performed before, I think, for the past 2 years. Ncdot would like to propose a funding swap of those, as I mentioned, SDBG BA funds for SDBG flex or any area funds. Since it's anticipated that this funding swap would bring additional cash to Ncdot for FY 2021, the department would like to then position, would then be in a position to allow more projects that are locally administered to get started or restarted. We have with us staff from Ncdot, I think Mike Stanley, that will provide a little bit more detail on this exercise.
Mr. Stanley, welcome.
Mayor, Board members committee, I appreciate the opportunity to join you today. As Kelly pointed out, Winston-Salem MPO has actually participated in this swap exercise for the last 2 years, and we are just asking you the committee's consideration for participating again for the fiscal 21 timeframe. So what I wanted to do was just take a few minutes to provide a little context for what the swap involves and just some background on federal funding and federal funding mechanisms for why this swap is advantageous to allowing more projects to be able to move forward. The first chart here is just showing the cylinder there in the middle of the screen is basically showing what amounts to our federal aid funding apportionment. This funding comes to Ncdot and to the other states through a multi-year reauthorization bill. Then as a separate action that's done through the annual appropriations process, Congress establishes what they call an obligation limit or obligation ceiling on the amount of that approved funding or apportioned funding that can actually be used by states to deliver projects. So the cylinders you see underneath are basically some of the federal aid core programs under which Ncdot gets our federal funding. The most funding comes in the National Highway Performance Program. We also get funding in the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program. And one subcomponent of that program is direct attributable funding, which is for urbanized areas over 200,000 population. So the swap is really aiming at this particular category of money in terms of optimizing our ability to get most number of projects moving forward. Because the federal funding comes to us in certain buckets that have certain amounts of money that are apportioned, then obligation authority is a separate thing that we have to apply to projects that are ready to deliver. We typically have a mismatch in where we have funding, where we have projects ready to go versus where we have the funding available to move them forward. So there is a federal funding mechanism known as advanced construction, which is where federal highway allows the state to request an authorization for a phase of work to begin, let's say construction. They will approve that authorization, but they will not actually obligate federal funds, meaning they have not entered into a commitment to reimburse the state DOT for expenditures on that project. So the way we use this advanced construct mechanism is we will authorize projects without necessarily having the obligation authority or the apportionment available to move forward or to obligate funding on those projects. So then what we're doing is basically reserving the right at some later date to obligate federal funds after we've already authorized the project and move forward on it. There's a separate activity that happens called August Redistribution, which is done in August of every year. But basically it's where Federal Highway Administration polls all the states to see which states are not going to be able to use all of their obligation authority for that year. Then that whatever's not able to be used gets turned in, and then it's redistributed to the remaining states that indicate that they would be able to use that additional obligation authority. So North Carolina has historically gotten about $30 to $40 million worth of additional obligation authority each year through this process. But in the last 3 years, we've gotten over $100 million each year. And part of the reason we've been able to be successful in bringing more spending capacity to the state is through the cooperation of our MPO partners that receive this direct attributable funding, allowing us to use some of that funding to opt to where we have apportionment available, which then puts us in a position to ask for additional obligation authority during the August redistribution. So what we are proposing here is if the MPO is agreeable to allowing us to obligate BGA funds. Yes. Did someone have a question?
No, so Mr. Stanley, we're getting close to, we're going to lose a member or two here in just a bit. So if you'll get close to, I think you're getting to the meat of the subject right now.
Okay. So basically, if we are allowed to swap, we will obligate those DA funds, which will put us in position to request additional obligation authority, which Byron, skip to the next slide. If we are able to, we were then able to get additional obligation authority, we can redistribute that out amongst the various core programs, which will enable us not only to obligate to do conversions on projects we have underway, but it'll allow us to start additional projects through the availability of the cash that comes in.
Very good. So, Mr. Stanley, let me ask the pertinent question that maybe other members want to ask. We're going to give you a horse now. Are you going to give us back a horse of equal or better quality later?
Right. The intention is if the MPO agrees to a swap for FY21, we would provide, in return, we would provide STBG flex funds to use in place of the DA beginning in federal fiscal 22.
Very good. So the answer is yes. We get a fair deal in this whole thing.
Right, it would be a dollar for dollar swap.
Perfect. Members, any questions for Mr. Stanley? And again, Mr. Stanley, I apologize for cutting you short, but we're approaching the bewitching hour for several folks.
Oh, no worries at all.
No questions for Mr. Stanley. Kirk, we will need a motion on this. Is there somebody willing to make a motion, please?
I'll make a
motion to approve.
Sounds like Mr. Fleming Alameen makes the motion. Mr. Clark makes the second. Kirk, will you please call the roll?
All right. Mr. Clark voted yes. Mr. Bessie?
Yes.
Got a vote.
Miss Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Alameen voted yes. Mr. Cross?
Yes.
Mr. Rogers?
Yes.
Mr. Waite?
Yes.
Ms. Fulton?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Mr. Flincham?
Yes.
Mr. Byram?
Yes.
Mr. Hutchins?
Yes.
Mr. Morris?
Yes.
Mr. Perkins?
Yes.
And Willie Clark?
Yes.
All right, motion passes unanimously, and that is the last item that needs a motion.
Very good. Thank you, members. We are going to begin to lose several of you at this particular point. Again, Mr. Stanley, thank you very much for joining us this evening. We didn't mean to cut you off, but
no worries.
the circus is back in the wagon. Members, we ordinarily get informational items briefed at this meeting for our next meeting. I'm going to ask staff if those can be done very briefly, and which will place an additional emphasis on us as members to pay attention to those in our agenda packets when they come out in advance of the meeting. If that's acceptable to the members, that's how we'll proceed. Any objections? Very good. Victoria, you have the first item for information, and again, welcome. You're a new member of the staff, and this is your first presentation at our meeting. Thank you very much. If you could briefly give us a summary.
Thank you, Mayor Horn. I'll try to move this along quickly for you. This information item is the review of targets for safety performance measures established by the Ncdot and amending the 2045 MTP. On August 31st, 2020, the Ncdot set its 2021 targets for the state's safety performance measures as required by the Federal Highway Administration. Now, North Carolina MPOs have 180 days to either endorse the state's targets or set their own, and the Winston-Salem urban area MPO has always endorsed the state's targets. Now, the state sets 5 targets or goals, and they are, this year, 1, to reduce total fatalities by 4.2%, to reduce the fatality rate by 4.35%, to reduce total serious injuries by 3.24%, to reduce serious injury rate by 3.35%, and finally, to reduce the total non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries by 3.65%. This item will come back to the board for action in January, and if there are any questions, Daryl Vreeland with the Ncdot should be on with us and he can answer those further.
Very good. Members, do we have any questions? And again, this is a light briefing item for our next meeting. Maybe Ms. Bailiff, if you could ask the Ncdot person maybe to join us at our January meeting, that would be great, and we can kind of move this along. I don't mean to cut anybody short this evening, but I do believe we're going to start losing members here pretty quickly.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. You did so well on that item, Victoria. You get the next one.
Thank you. This item is the review of the draft Winston-Salem Urban Area Metropolitan Planning Organization Public Participation Plan Update. The MPO adopted the current public participation policy on July 19th, 2012, so we are definitely in need of an update. The public participation plan has been updated to a more user-friendly format and outline, and situations that have arisen due to the COVID-19 pandemic have been taken into account in this document. And we've made provisions for virtual public interaction. The update includes the latest federal act and a social media policy, and has also updated the contact list in the appendix.
Very good.
And the public review process will begin and continue for the required 45 days. Are there any other questions?
Members, any quick questions for Victoria? Thank you very much. Excellent job in your presentations for your first time on the big stage. So thank you very much. Okay, Mr. Brown, I think you have our last informational item.
All right. The Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program, or the MTIP, is a list of all the a comprehensive list of all the projects for the Winston-Salem urban area. This list must match the state's Transportation Improvement Program, or STIP. The modifications, amendments, deletions of projects that are before you are the latest update to the state's transportation plan. We have advertised this for public review for 30 days per our public participation policy. That was done between October 20th and November 19th. This is the first time the board is hearing this, so this is information that will come back to the board in January for action. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Brown? Thanks, Byron. That was a great report, great primer for next month. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our informational items for this evening. There are just a couple of quick things that I'd like to call our attention to, and I think they're important in our staff reports. The first one, Suzette Morales, are you still here? If you are, if you can give us just a brief update on the Transportation Management Area Certificate Review, which I think is very important to our MPO.
Yes, I am still here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right. Just a quick update. So at least every 4 years, the Department of Transportation has to certify each of the MPOs that they are carrying out the metropolitan planning process in adherence to the federal statutes and regulations. It's a joint review with Federal Highways and the Federal Transit Administration, and we are just going through making sure that each of the planning processes and activities are following as they should. We will be doing the certification review with the MPO staff, as well as the transit operators and the relevant Ncdot staff. And it will be done on December 2nd and December 3rd. And I believe your MPO staff will be sending out information about that. We will also be having a, right after the Thursday meeting at 1 p.m., there'll be opportunity for the TAC and TCC to provide comment and feedback that they would like about the planning process. So it'll be on different topics like organization structure, the MTP, the TIP, and also public outreach. But that's my update for that. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Morales. Other than conducting shorter meetings, I think we'll pass with flying colors in all areas. The last item, members, that I added to the information only, and Matthew, thanks for sticking around. This is Great Trail State Plan. This is important because this is an opportunity, obviously, to get some bike and other pedestrian plans on the map. And Matthew, if you can give us just a quick update, because we do have some deadlines on this one.
Understood. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, TAC members. I'm Matthew Burchek with the Winston-Salem MPO, and I just wanted to give a brief update on Ncdot's Greenway planning efforts. So they are working on an effort called the Great Trail State Plan. And it's essentially a planning effort to identify a network of multi-use trails of statewide significance. So they're not necessarily looking at every trail in every community, but focusing their attention on those trails that will connect regions within the state and connect where people live to recreational and transportation opportunities. So one example of such a trail in our region is the Piedmont Regional Greenway, which would connect Winston-Salem through Kernersville and eventually to Greensboro. And with the plan, they want to focus on those kinds of connections throughout the state, and then facilitate that kind of multi-jurisdictional coordination that's required to build trails of that nature. And in the end, what they hope to do is direct resources to help planning and designing and constructing those trails. So they recently reached a milestone in the planning efforts. They have a draft network that's available for review. So Kirk had sent out an email earlier this week with some information about how to get involved with that review. There are maps available on the project website that you can either review on the website or download. And then there are surveys and opportunities to provide feedback. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about that.
Matthew, we have a deadline date on this as what?
The deadline, oh, I'm sorry, I don't have that deadline in front of me. I believe it's early December.
Yeah, I believe it is. That's why it's on your members. I encourage you to take a look at this because once again, this is an opportunity to enhance these kind of opportunities for your community. Thank you, Matthew. Any questions for Matthew? Thank you. Thanks for sticking with us.
Of course.
Two final items. One is bittersweet for us. I know, Mr. Bessie, that you will be leaving us and not be with us the first of the year. I mean, you'll still be on this earth. You just won't be attending as a member of the TAC. I'm expressing our appreciation. I know every member and staff is expressing our appreciation for your service. You've been on the TAC for 18 years, and you've also served as the chairperson of the TAC. Even though, Dan, you don't look that in your age, that's a long time to provide the service unselfishly like you have. We will do something a little more formal and a little more meaningful, I hope, at our January meeting to recognize your service. And we're going to miss you, Dan, because you ask all the right questions and you ask staff to look at some of the things that maybe the rest of us would miss. So your presence is going to be missed, but I hope you'll stay engaged in the community.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. It has been a privilege and a pleasure to serve with each of you. I'm not much for ceremony, so thanks for the thanks, and I'll look forward to continue to work with you in one way or another.
Very good. Thank you, Dan. So, ladies and gentlemen, that will conclude our meeting. I want to wish those who are watching at home, if there's anybody watching at home, but certainly to our members and staff, best wishes for a safe, underline the word safe, and joyous holiday season. This is a special time for all of us and a little unusual this year. So please, please, please stay safe. With that, members, any comments? Good. We'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
Very good. Mr. Bessie makes his final motion as a TAC member. Ms. Adams, thank you very much for your second on that. Unless there are objections, I'm going to make the motion that we accept this by unanimous acclamation, not necessarily having to go through the roll call. If there are no objections, that's what we will do. Are there any objections?
It's always great to talk to you. Thank you for spending some time with us today.
Very good.
The center of American politics right now.
I'm not sure who that's talking to or what that's talking to, but thank you for your contribution. It's very meaningful at this time. Very good. Members, thanks again for everything. We are adjourned and we'll see you January 21st.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you.